Hello and welcome back to AP World History Modern. Today we're going to begin our second day looking at the Mongols. Really just kind of look at economic systems, then we'll do a little skill practice CCoT with some of the other themes. So explain how the expansion of the empires influenced trade, communication over time. All right, so remember this is the empire that we are looking at, and it's vast. So it's going to create some kind of interesting economic and governance challenges. And of course, massive significance impact of this, right? So remember last time we talked about just some of the after the Mongolian Empire is created, we enter into this period of Pax Mongolica. This, once you get by the conquest, this about 100-year period of peace and stability that existed in Central Asia, which is going to result in an increase in economic activity. And then, of course, we're going to see the subsequent economic growth and cultural diffusion that will occur as a result of that. All right. This government is maintained, and the economic growth is encouraged because of the YAM system. Right. So this YAM system is going to increase communication, but also support business, right? Merchant growth. All right. I want to talk about the Yasa real quick, and I guess I was going to do some claim activity today in class, and I ended up going down a rabbit hole. So I just want to spend a few minutes kind of talking about this. I guess the rabbit hole I kind of got a little lost on today in class. And burnt through my claim development time, was we were looking at whether how to approach the documents that we associate with Genghis Khan. Was he really a brutish mass murderer? And you can look at all the other kind of horrific claims that are about him. How do we judge him, or how do you judge him, and how do you look at these documents? So I just kind of went through a few things just because of you are going to have to be dealing with some of these sources. And I just want to go through this just as a way of saying that, approach the sources carefully. All right. So what I mean by that is, if you look at the historical accounts of the Mongols, I guess the easiest way to kind of approach this is when I was your age, when I was, taking my high school world history class, I don't ever remember hearing about the Mongols. The first time I really ever even remember hearing about the Mongols, like my first real memory would have been in the mid-1990s. I think I was in a 400 level Russian history course. And I was learning about the Golden Horde, the Tatars, and I was learning about how horrible they were. I think that was my first memory of the Mongols. So hearing about them destroying entire villages, mass murder, that kind of stuff. And I guess probably the next few times I came across them was from Chinese references or from Persian sources. So one of the things I always kind of want to stress here is that when you are looking at the sources of the Mongols, you got to keep in mind a few things. One is, and I guess this is probably one of the reasons why the Mongols are kind of so entrenched in world history today, is that up until the 1990s. Genghis Khan's story, the expansion of the Mongols' story, was never told from a Mongolian perspective until the 90s. Right, so you got to keep in mind, once the Khanates collapse and the Yuan dynasty ends, the Ming dynasty, not too deep into their rule, in the 1430s and 40s. Is going to start construction of that modern portion of the Great Wall of China to prevent another Mongol resurgence. The Qing dynasty is going to conquer the Mongolia, and subjugate them, and we will see in the you will see Mongolia subjugated by the Qing, and then we see in the 20th century, you know, the Soviet Union kind of putting its thumbs down onto Mongolia, forcing Stalinist purges, during the Stalin years, and of course the People's Republic of China, once it gets created, will work against the recognition of Mongolia in the United Nations. Mongolia was isolated, and from the rest of the world for hundreds and hundreds of years, really for the last almost 400 years, Mongolia has been kind of highly isolated from the rest of the world by its neighbors. And so when you're looking at sourcing material, keep in mind Mongolian perspectives have only really started to be created or examined for the past 30 years, right? So kind of keep that in mind. The vast majority of the records that are out there are not Mongolian, and they are from the literate class. So what do we know about the literate class who was not Mongolian? The literate class that was not Mongolian was especially harshly targeted by the Mongols. We know that Genghis Khan did not like the aristocracy, did not like or trust the nobility, and because of that, they often faced the harshest repercussions when resistance took place. So you are hearing from the survivors of a group of people who were really harshly treated by the Mongols. So keep that in mind and think about point of view limitations when you are reading the sources. I am not saying that when you're looking at the secret history of the Mongols that you need to take that as 100% true. I am simply saying consider the limitations of the documents, the primary source documents, when you are approaching these topics. Okay, these are really old. You're talking 800 years ago. These are old topics, and the source material is sometimes a little squishy. All right. So with all that being said, right, what do we know about Genghis Khan as far as the brutality aspects? Right, we know from the Chinese, the Persian, the Russian perspective, we know about the brutality, right? So, but from a Mongolian perspective, we know that there was an ethical code that Genghis Khan applied a lot of the time, and I say a lot of the time, or I kind of threw that out there, because we also know that Genghis Khan violated said ethical code towards the end of his life, right? So what is that kind of ethical code? Well, we have this thing known as the Yesa, all right? So the Yesa is kind of a compilation code, right? So kind of a compilation code, and this is roughly what we know about it, is that you've all heard the stories of conquest and what happens if you surrender and what happens if you don't, or what happens if you do surrender and then you try to rebel. That Genghis Khan was religiously tolerant, right? These are the things that we know about him. And these come through the sources, but these also come through the Yesa. Right, so we do have this kind of ethical code, right? That is part of this time frame. So if you are judging him, not based on today's ethical codes, but was he true to his own ethical code? This is where it gets a little difficult, because if you're using the other sources, the Chinese, the Persian, the Russian sources, it comes across as if he is violating his ethical code. Whereas if you only read it through the secret history perspective, then it'll look like he's not, or he is following his ethical code. So it's a challenging thing. Right? It is a challenging thing. You can make the assertion both ways. A couple of other things on this is the Yesa, right? The Yesa was also used by his enemies, or by the enemies of the Mongols, as a way to rally people. So when you look at, like, for example, number 11 on this thing, number 11 we know that this was used by the Mamluks as a way to rally Muslims, because this is in violation of Sharia, and so the Mamluks rallied their people, by pointing out that this existed, and that if they were to lose to the Mongols, then they would be forced to violate their own religious tenets. So legal codes like this, can be used to kind of support, ethical practices by leaders, point out violations of ethical practices by leaders. Like, for example, we know Genghis Khan violated his own ethical codes, by choosing his own sons to be the successors to him, thus violating his belief in meritocracy. That comes from the Yesa, right? So, and we know law codes can also be used to rally against, right? So, as I just pointed out with the Mamluks. All right. So anyway, we got to do a little bit of a class discussion today. It kind of got lost a little bit, so apologize for that. All right. So today in class, in some of the classes that we didn't go too deep into the rabbit hole, we went through some of these parts of this chart. So I'm just going to go through and do some of this with you. All right. So I think last class, no, we did this. No, we did this last class. So today, basic features in 1200. Right. So Central Asian trade had fallen into disuse, and maritime trades on the rise in the Indian Ocean and the maritime. Continuity, so Caravansaries are continuity, but some of the big changes we're seeing is Genoese Italian city-state integration into the Black Sea trade system. And we're seeing the YAM system, where the businesses have precedence, merchants have precedence over all outs, as a component of Pax Mongolica. We know that we have a secure trading network, and we know that bronze medallions will guarantee safe passage. So by the time we get to 1450, by the time we get to the end of the period, Pax Mongolica is coming to an end, and this economic boom time in Central Asia is also on the decline. But demand for luxury goods especially on the European side of the Silk Road, does not go away. If anything, it is intensifying and resulting in maritime trade, increasing, in volume, carrying those luxury goods. So we're seeing like a revitalization of demand for luxury goods, from the European side of the Silk Road. All right, so that's kind of one of our kind of key changes that we're seeing, and what the implications, right? You can start to make those assertions. Technology and innovation, right? So, we see by the beginning, stirrups are in wide use, by 1200 on the Central Asian steppe, and of course the Mongols are going to bring that with them as well. Gunpowder, I think we talked about this in the last video, so I'm just gonna move past this slide. All right, cultural developments. When you start talking about the cultural developments of the Mongols, at the beginning of this period, we know that Buddhism is already in place. That it's already hit its peak in China. The Mahayana Buddhism, at least. Islam is in South Asia by this point. Southeast Asia just barely. And North Africa. But by the end, you're going to have an trend. By the time you get to 1450, Islam is going to be solidly in place in Southeast Asia. You will have sultanates by that time. All right. In Christianity, right, in place in Europe, Ethiopia, Kievan Rus. By the time we get to the end of the period, we're going to see the rise of what becomes Russia, Muscovy, right? It's kind of will be almost there, right? So what are some of the big continuities, as far as religion? There's, all the religions basically tread water during this time frame. There's no kind of major changeovers. However, there are some changes here. Islam will spread amongst the people, of the Mongolian Empire, and this is, partially due to migration. But we also know that many of the Turkic groups that allied with the Mongols had earlier converted to Islam, and a significant number of them are going to be literate and employed by the Mongols as clerics and administrators, translators, as well as soldiers. We know that they're going to carry the Quran and their beliefs to new converts. Persia and what is today Iraq were already overwhelmingly Muslim. Right, this is where the Abbasid Caliphate was centered. Right, so when the Mongolians sweep in, Persian will become one of the official languages within the Mongol Empire, used even in China. Right, and Persian culture, along with Islam, will spread into Central and East Asia. The Mongol kind of great Khans preferred Muslims for senior positions in China. We know that they had Persian bureaucrats who they forced to migrate, to China under Kublai Khan. Right, so they thought that foreign Muslims could be more impartial than local Chinese Confucian bureaucrats. The foreign recruits could be blamed in the case of Chinese dissatisfaction. Right, so this is kind of, these Persian bureaucrats are obviously filling the role of Confucian bureaucrats, which will lead to a lot of unpopularity. Scholars from Persia were especially admired for their scientific knowledge, mathematical knowledge. Right, in China, though, they were respected by the Confucian scholars. We're also going to start to see, just kind of looking at Buddhism. Buddhism advanced in China under Yuan rule, Mongol rule, owing partly to the direct support from the great Khans, the rulers of the different Khanates. Tibetan monks who frequently held secular as well as religious power. In Central Asia, they begin to move to China. Of course, Kublai Khan, his wife Shabi, was an ardent Buddhist, right? Found political experience of the lamas useful. So you see Buddhist advisors. Kublai Khan, also in the Yuan dynasty in China, will make large financial donations to Buddhist temples, and give tax exempt status to Buddhist monks, something that Buddhist monks in China had not seen since the Tang era. So, and also, you see kind of, there is one religion that loses, right, as a result of the Mongols, and that would be to say Christianity, right? So out of the major religions that were in place in 1200, Christianity kind of loses out in the long run. But not through any actions by the Mongols per se, right? Some members of the Mongol princely houses and senior advisors were Nestorian Christians, right, or Manichaean Christianity. Christians also served in the army, right? Some of the steppe tribes within the Mongol Empire were Nestorian Christians. We know that popes, or several popes, are gonna send envoys out to try to convert Mongols. European leaders hope, that align with Mongol leaders against Muslim powers that challenge European political and commercial interests, might be possible, right? This is, of course, as part of the story of Marco Polo. What Marco Polo and his dad was doing. Dad and his uncle were doing, out there on a religious economic mission. But neither political overtures nor religious missionary activity resulted in much success, right? So when we look at Christianity suffers partly because it was highly diverse, right? You've got Latin Christendom, you had the Orthodox faith out of Constantinople, you had the older Nestorian Christianity, and so a lot of infighting within Christianity, coming into is trying to overcome a more unified Islam and an already entrenched Buddhism, right, in East Asia. So culturally, you're going to see, some gains and some losses. So Nestorian Christianity largely disappears. So when, kind of next time we talk about Christianity in China or in East Asia, will be in the 1500s when we start talking about the Jesuits, right? So yeah, all right. What else we got? Lastly, governance, right? So governance, China Song Dynasty. By the time we get to the end, we're going to be in the Ming Dynasty. By the time you get to 1450, so the Yuan is, right? The Yuan is the Mongol, right? And of course, the dynastic cycle in the dynasties themselves will be a continuity in throughout this time period. So whether it's a Han Chinese dynasty or or a pastoral nomadic group ruling over China, right? Dynastic cycle will be a continuity. But you will see Khanates, right? You will see the Khanates. You will see the Yam system, right? Kind of taking precedence as a communication system for governance. We see the spread of different sultanates. So, Islam was already in places like South Asia, but you're going to see the spread of different sultanates during this time period. Governance in Europe, you're going to see feudalism, with very little impact from the Mongols on this, directly. You'll see feudalism come to a decline, and of course, serfdom in Europe will come to almost an entirely end in the western part of Europe. Now, while the Mongols are not directly connected to this, they are indirectly because of the bubonic plague. Right, the spread of the Black Death will ultimately cause serfdom to decline in Europe after it gets to Europe in 1347. Right, and of course, the Mongols will directly be connected to the decline and the collapse of Kievan Rus, right, and out of the chaos created by the Golden Horde, you'll see the eventual rise of Muscovy and eventually what is now known as Russia. All right, so that's about all for today. So a lot of stuff, I guess. So who are the Mongols? They're a pastoral nomadic group from Central Asia, one of many, led by Temujin, who becomes known as the Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. Right, so skill on horseback, will enable them to defeat the major established powers that were present in 1200. New empires and dynasties will form, and maybe they contribute to the ascendancy of Europe. Break down feudalism, serfdom in Europe, create this demand for goods from the Indian Ocean world, and will push Europe to expand. So maybe they're part of that story. All right, and then cultural impact, massive movements of technology and knowledge and religious ideas, but not a lot of converts, right? Right, but of course the Black Death will loom over. All right, that is all for today. We did our daily 5 at the beginning, but I'm not doing over the computer for now. So encourage you to work on your projects. And I checked homework. All right. Sapriati.